Welcome to this special edition episode of the podcast to celebrate the launch of my new book, You've Got This. On today's episode, you get to hear the interview I did with Nicola Elliott, who is the founder of NEOM Wellbeing. Started when Nicola became anxious herself and overwhelmed as her fast-paced life as a journalist, which included jetting around the world to the most incredible countries. It was a job that she really, really loved, but it all became too much. She realised that her lifestyle wasn't helping her to live a happy and healthy life. She started by addressing the basics, but then moved on to training as a nutritionist before entering into the world of essential oils and realising their impact on her. She trained as an aromatherapist, started making blends for friends and family, and that's where it all really started. Now, NEOM has hundreds of products bearing its name and has also got shops and concessions all over the world. It is an incredible brand, a really cool brand, and go and follow them on social media. The impact that they have is amazing. I hope you love this podcast. It's a really good one. Enjoy. So, can you start by telling us about the journey to kind of get to where you are today, but I guess particularly at the beginning, why did you start your business?
How long do you want this in? Because I can do this in 1 minute or 5 minutes.
Go for five. I want to hear all the ins and outs anyway.
Okay. All right. So I was a journalist for 8 years and I loved it. It was a brilliant job, great fun. I worked on all the women's glossies. So I did Glamour, InStyle, Marie Claire, Heat, back in the sort of 90s, noughties. And did a lot of travel, London, New York, LA. It was great fun. But I started getting really quite bad anxiety. And, that was way before this was the word. I mean, we're sort of lucky, I suppose, that people are talking about it so much so that, it's everywhere right now. But there wasn't a word, until probably, I don't know, maybe 5-10 years ago.
Yeah.
So I just thought I was just going a bit nutty. And it just was all becoming far too much. And actually, the really interesting thing when I look back was nothing really bad happened to me. I just was pushing too much into my life and not looking after myself. Again, this is way back before wellbeing was a word. So I didn't exercise. I barely saw the sunlight. There was no real understanding, especially I imagine being a 25, 6, 7-year-old woman, of eating whole foods or just looking after yourself in any way. And I remember my mum sort of saying, you need to look after yourself better. You just can't work 16 hours a day, live on pesto and pasta, never see the sunlight, and not look after yourself. And because things had got kind of pretty bad, I thought, well, yeah, I've got no choice. I'm going to have to. And so, again, with very little knowledge back then, I started to just, get the basics in check, I suppose. So, yeah, getting out for a walk in the daylight, going to the gym. I retrained as a nutritionist, actually became really interested in nutrition and how that could help me. And as part of that sort of journey, entered into the very crusty health food shop at the top of my road in Islington, of which, was a far cry from the fresh and wilds of today. And, I bought myself a bag of nuts and an old banana, I think. And, and actually, as part of that very uninspiring trip, at the back of the store, there was a whole lot of essential oils. And I thought, this is interesting. Nothing much more than that. Bought some oils, came home, and remember sort of, tinkering in my bathroom, this very tiny bathroom, and being really impressed with how I could help myself feel better at the end of a day, based on what blends I could create. And during that process, I remember looking around and of course comparing in general to all my friends, as you do, and thinking, my God, everyone I know seems to suffer from either stress and or the ramifications of it, sleep, poor sleep, not being able to get to sleep, the effects of not sleeping, low energy, or a mood imbalance. And I suppose if there was ever a light bulb moment for NEOM, it was really understanding, my gosh, these 4 pillars are kind of really integral to our well-being. And actually, if you get those 4 in check, that's kind of the holy grail. And then just blending oils for friends that almost always, well, did always fit into one of those four categories. Boyfriend at the time, no energy after playing football to go out on a night. Sister not sleeping. Flatmate mood all over the place. And so everything sort of came back to one of those four blends. And so I thought it was a very, excuse the pun, especially in the circumstance, organic process. I blended an oil. It took 2 years for it to get to a point where I knew what I was doing and felt like I kind of was having some positive effect. But the first blend I created for myself was called Real Luxury. It's actually still one of our best sellers. Oh, wow. I didn't call it that at the time, obviously, but I think for me, the idea of feeling calm and content and my anxiety kind of being able to get a grip on it was real luxury, especially coming from a magazine world where, I suppose you've been previously taught that real luxury was handbags and shoes and all the rest of it. For me, it wasn't that. And so that was really kind of how the concept of NEOM was kind of born. I came from a very entrepreneurial family from a business point of view. So I think I always sort of really liked the idea of working for myself and creating something. I had much grander ideas for NEOM, if I'm really honest, than what we had to when we were forced to start off with, because we had no money to launch a brand. So I all saw it the way that it is now. But of course, to launch a beauty brand with, we've got over 200 products and stores and all the rest of it, that clearly was a learning curve to realize actually you can afford to create 4 products and that's that. So we started off a lot smaller. And that was a good thing because we tested the water and, building the community and really understanding what was working for real people was a really important part of the growth. So I think, that was the inception.
I love that as well. I spoke to Emma Bridgewater yesterday, and hers was very much a similar story in terms of there was a need for something. She developed that need and she started with a smaller collection. And I guess what we term today kind of bootstrapping, almost like you buy the product, you sell the product, you make more product, you buy the product. I think so many people, particularly when they start off, think, right, I need an investor, I need this. And actually to start with, often we just need to do the thing.
Do you know what? There's a lot of elements of business that I always find difficult to give advice on because I feel there's many different ways to skin the cat, and it's not up to me to say this one's better than that one. But one thing I would definitely always say is start small. Even if you've got millions of pounds, I would start small because there's a few reasons. You have to test and learn. No matter how much you feel something's a good idea, taking it to market, you will iterate. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is it generally is so much easier, again, even with several millions of pounds, to get cut through when you're talking or displaying or explaining 1, 2, 3, 4 products, something quite small. It's very, very difficult to start with, 50 products and give them all enough sort of time in the sun, if you like. So, there's many different elements that people say, should we get an investor? Should we bring on a partner? Should we? And I'm like, here's the case for, here's the case against. But that one, I would definitely say, whoever you are, whatever you're making and whatever your budget, always start small. Yeah.
So you went from having these 4 blends, and then how did that scale to where you are now? Because obviously you're that time to where you are now, there's a world of difference there, isn't there?
Brick by brick is the answer, slowly. It's interesting now, we sort of hear about, I suppose through social media, all these brands that have scaled really quickly and sold for £1 billion. The fact is, those success stories happen once in a blue moon, and for every one of those there's a dozen more, 100 more NEOMs. I've grown in that sort of, and there's pros and cons for that. The fact is, if you want to be huge straight away, you're probably going to have to take a huge amount of investment, and so that comes with you, the payoff being you've got other people in the mix. Other people probably own and control your business. If you go small, you can own it yourself and control it yourself. That was important to me. I could argue for both, but we grew NEOM very small and controlled, and we learned, and we've made every mistake under the sun, and I mean every mistake under the sun. But there was no moment where it suddenly all took off. There's little bits on the journey, Selfridges to take you on board, that's a real win. A celebrity writes about you, that's a real win. The moment you get a new store, that's a new win. But I would say the graph has been relatively even. There's never a moment where I said that was the point. It was just brick by brick and a whole load of graft, really.
Sure. And what would you say on your journey? As you say, you said you've made lots of mistakes, but have there been any things that you would have seen as, I want to say a block, but not a block that you can't get over? So is there anything on your journey that you think, actually, that was really hard and this is how I had to overcome it?
The people issues, I think, on every level have always been the hardest. Is always a challenge, and it's difficult because the people that you need when the business is tiny versus the people you need when it becomes medium size and then bigger is quite often different. Not always, but mainly. So that's really, really difficult. And then obviously you've got challenges like, can you afford the right people that you need? So if you can't afford those people, then you are trying to learn skills outside of your own skill set. So there's a multitude of issues, I think, with people that have always been the greatest problems. You can't always quantify them as well. The opportunity cost of getting someone in who, might be wrong or doesn't get the brand or can't grow with the brand. It's difficult to quantify those things. So I'd say getting the people wrong is one thing that if I could kind of rewind and inject something into my head, I would have, maybe learned differently and done things differently.
Did you ever, particularly when you were starting out, did you ever sort of doubt yourself? Did you think, who am I to do this? Why am I doing this? Or it's really interesting, the different people I've spoken to. Some people are like, no, I knew it was the right thing to do. And other people were like, absolutely. I've come from one setting where I was very confident to a setting where I wasn't.
Yes, I think in different ways. I mean, I'm a relatively confident person and I could see where I was going, but there's been some interesting watch outs. So I think if you come from a career where you're quite successful, going back to sort of really the inception of something and everything that comes with that, no support from a big business, no budgets, no great co-workers around you who are also, really talented people. There's a whole infrastructure that falls away that you maybe aren't aware of. And that, that's a bit of a realization moment. I think there's been, initially you can start something and generally people are quite receptive to newness because it's interesting and you're all sort of full of fire and enthusiasm, and it sort of is regarded in, people want to look at something new. But I think I always compare to the second album analogy. After a year or two, that's when the going gets tough because people have seen your, I don't know, cushion range and thought it was cool initially and it was a nice idea and you had a cool logo and it was an interesting story. But, one swallow doesn't make a summer. And so it's then what do you bring to the table the next year and the next year and the next year? And incidentally, that then becomes harder, I think, mentally because you're then 2, 3, 4, 5 years away from your old career. And there's no money coming in. So it's not the starting that I found the difficult part. It was sort of that year 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It was that sort of stage, that moment where you're at year 6 and you're still not earning as much as you did in your old career, still not got the support, and everyone's, the sort of the appetite for newness and the shiny kind of new stuff that you brought to the table is kind of gone a bit. That's the hard bit. And I think that's when you have to dig deep. And I suppose if I ever had a moment of doubt, it wasn't doubt as much as, oh shit, that came then more than ever. And I've had those moments and those feelings. I've been in tears many, many, many times. But, really over the kind of the whole thing, I would say it was at that point.
And how did you overcome that? Because we do hear of lots of young businesses starting out. So you get that enthusiastic buzz to start with, and then it does get really, really hard. As you say, you can perhaps you put savings aside if you want to change careers, but that runs out. You think it's going to be easy, or you're on the cusp of something, but it's really hard. How did you manage that situation? How did you deal with it?
The honest answer is I had no choice, and I always wonder whether if I'd had a rich relative or husband or a way out, would I have kept going at that point? Because that came for me at a point when the children were very young, life was very hard, we had no money, and if someone had offered me a way out, would I have took it? And I think it'd be really unfair to say categorically, no, I knew my own mind, because, I don't know, maybe I would. And so that becomes a bigger sort of philosophical conversation, doesn't it? I suppose practically, what would I advise people having gone through that? Is maybe not put all your eggs in one basket, so that pressure doesn't feel as great. I mean, in a way, that's contrary to what I've just said, because the pressure forced me to keep going, but it's not a period that I would really advocate anyone kind of going through. So sort of it kind of ties up to, I always say, don't leave a job to go to something. Have it as a side hustle till you've got enough green shoots of it actually working. Even if you go down to 3 days a week and you're doing your side hustle a couple of days, you get that sort of momentum and that appetite before you jump into something, because it can be years before it sort of starts taking off, working, before you understand your customer. So probably would have done that again with hindsight. So yeah.
No, it's a really good point, because I think some people think they have to go all in immediately or they're not being serious. And actually, we've seen loads of businesses that started as someone had this passion and this thought and this idea. They did the research, they started developing it on the side, working evenings, weekends, stupid o'clock. And then when they started to get more and more successful, they were able to spend more time on it, which I think is a really good shout. So from those kind of quite dark times, was there that green shoots you said? What was the thing that got you out of those when the kind of fortune started to change?
I think I always really believed in the idea, the concept. I'd really researched naturals. I really understood well-being and where that was going, and it just made sense to me. It's not a trend. I was never attracted to something that was a trend. That's why I think I'd be quite nervous to go into makeup or something, because what's cool today might not be cool or fashion, next year. Yeah. Whereas it felt to me, having really researched what was in a lot of products, that it had to make sense that there had to be natural alternatives that really worked. And coming from the beauty background, the magazine industry, a lot of my friends who are beauty journalists, it was a time of cosmeceuticals, and they were sort of saying, naturals don't work as well. It's all about sort of retinol was just kind of coming in, and those, as I say, those doctor brands. And I thought, no, you haven't done your research. There's some really brilliant natural ingredients, and not everyone wants to partake. Not that I'm sort of saying that's not the right thing to do, but needs to be a choice for people who want to use more natural things. I was buoyed by the food industry. I could see, especially my nutrition work, I could see that people were interested in what was going into their bodies. I remember sort of, as a child of the 80s, when that E102 scare shocked everyone, and my mum went from feeding us packet lasagnas every night, thinking that was the good middle class thing to do with lots of added vitamins and minerals, to going, oh my goodness, and everything sort of changed. And so I remember seeing that, and then thinking that it's got to have an impact on beauty, what you're putting on your skin, the largest organ. So I knew there was nothing out there coming from magazines. I knew that people, if they were doing something natural, and it's still the case, I think, today, generally it's very basic in terms of a formulation, not very pretty, doesn't smell that great, it's not that effective. So I knew there was an appetite, and there was going to be more of an appetite for natural, that had to be something really quite sophisticated. With aromatherapy, I was sick of just, and even today, I love a lot of very simple aromatherapeutic blends, but a lot of them are very clunky and singular noted and not very sophisticated. So I knew from magazines that there needed to be, women were demanding that level of sophistication, quite rightly so. And I knew that we were going to become a bit more aware of our well-being because we were lagging so far behind, especially in the UK. So I really believed in those things, I think, more or as much as my brand.
Yeah.
And so I think it's about sort of, if you really believe in, the need for, I'm making this up, right, but like affordable homeware or bras that are going to last 3 times as long as the average because X, Y, Z. It's sort of almost believing in the purpose more than just the product level and the problems that people have. I really believe that we were becoming more and more stressed. How that would manifest, I didn't know then that we were going to develop, for example, now what's a bestseller for us, magnesium, body butter or bath milk. That wasn't in the thought. That wasn't conceived of, but I knew that we were going to be developing things that would help with those well-being needs in a natural way and an effective natural way. So I think if you believe in the cause and the mission, then your brand can evolve over time to be at the forefront of what that means for customers.
Yeah.
So yeah, I believed in that probably more than I believed in myself or in what NEOM was then.
Yes, that cause, and that you have done the research, it's the right thing, and also I guess from your own experiences the difference that it made to you personally.
Definitely. And I mean, we started with candles, but back then I think the stat was that 98% of candles were made of paraffin wax. And actually that's not changed so much, ironically. Wow. In all that time. And I knew paraffin wax was a crude oil derivative. I knew it was in pretty much even all the high-end candles that you buy in the department stores now. So I thought that can't make sense, and there has to be an alternative to burning paraffin wax and synthetic fragrances in your home. So it was a sort of the mission beneath, I think, the product that I really believed in. And if you're starting a cafe and you really believe in, I don't know, healthy but hearty food, that's going to be something that remains even when we find out in another 5 years that actually, I don't know, the new sweet potato superfood is X. You can evolve it to that. So I think you have to believe in that mission. And I think it's important because also I've been doing NEOM for 18 years now. And to still have the love and the passion and be able to have the appetite to evolve that and the enthusiasm to run it, because it will become a marathon for you. I think you have to believe in the cause because the cause will evolve. So I would always advocate that whatever you're doing, if it's, any business.
Did you find that sometimes you didn't have the support from others? I mean, you mentioned when you got into that phase. What was that like? Because I think we hear so many businesses that a person's hugely passionate in it, but the people around them don't get it, aren't particularly supportive, and that can have a massively detrimental impact on the business and on the person as well.
Yeah, I mean, there was a long time where I remember people just sort of laughing and going, "Oh, you're going to be a famous businesswoman." Ha 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 ha. I remember thinking, "Oh, yeah." I mean, it's not a joke.
Yeah.
So I remember that being very much the case, and I suppose that's when you become quite reliant on yourself, actually, and I think I can only speak from my own personal experience. It toughens you up and it makes you believe that at the end of the day, you are on your own, even with the people that love you around. It's you have to have a unique mindset, and it's you who has to have it. It's not your partner. It's not your friends. It's not your parents. In fact, many of them will go. I remember my grandma saying to me at the time, after about 5 years, "Do you think it's time to realise you made a mistake now. I was like, oh, it's
Oh
too
my
late to go
God.
back to my old job, Grandma.
Oh, bless her.
Um,
Oh,
so people aren't going to be as supportive or believe in you as much as because if they would do it. That's not their problem. That's not their responsibility. You know, everyone's got their own take on life, and everyone's got their own, you know, their own way of looking at things. So it's a nonsense to think that, you know, even your friend who you've got loads in common with is going to go, I know you can make this, because she might think the very best of you and think, oh God, what the hell are you doing?
yeah.
So it does, I think, foster a very strong sense of self and individualism.
Did you do anything to develop that kind of mindset and that resilience, or do you feel that it was sort of slightly hardwired into you? Because you said you came from quite an entrepreneurial background.
Yeah, I think I came from an entrepreneurial background, and my dad actually used to have a car auction, which is as far a business from NEOM as you can imagine. But I think it was always the idea of working for myself was always kind of up there, which is fascinating because I do think that comes from your parents, or it comes from something. Because you know, my partner now, for example, is in the financial services, and his parents, they very much fetishized the idea of working in a big institution. And so I think, you know, I remember being offered a really big job as an editor right before I left. Glamour was the last job that I did. And I rang my dad, and he was like really unimpressed, because he said, if you take that, you will never work for yourself. So I can't deny that I think coming from that entrepreneurial background, and that being sort of the seen as the holy grail, whatever that was hugely an impact. But I try with my children now to let them see that both paths are fruitful. You know, it's about finding something that you love and doing it well. And it doesn't matter what it is, but I do see people now being middle-aged who haven't got that thing for themselves. And it doesn't have to be a huge multi-million pound business, but just something that fosters that independence, you know, that where you can find your tribe of people, where you go to work and it's something away from husbands, partners, children, that gives you enough money that you can make decisions in your life. And, you know, I hope for my children that they can see how fruitful that independence can be, wherever it comes from.
No, completely. So if you were giving people on their entrepreneurial business journey some tips, if they were sort of struggling, or they just didn't know where to go. I mean, the whole book's called You've Got This, and it is meant to be really, it's telling stories, but also offering support with these things that throw themselves in our way. What kind of, I mean, you've given loads of tips already, but are there any other tips that have really helped you along your journey?
Well, I said about the side hustle, didn't I? And I would definitely advocate that. And I think the point of which you keep iterating. The process is not just give yourself confidence. It's about iteration of the product or the service during that time until you get that green light that it is working. So that sort of is it's not about balancing two things to get two levels of income. It might be that, but it's more about the project is you're going to take, you know, ideally 6 months to a year or whatever time frame you put around it. But during that time, you're working towards finding out what's going to work and starting small within that. I think iterating maybe sometimes quite a bit out of how you started is not a bad thing. You know, if we never thought we would do electronic pods, it sells fantastically well for us. We never thought, as I said, we'd do magnesium body butter. We never thought that our best selling product would be a pillow mist. But if you remain focused on your core mission early on and your reason for existing, then actually that allows you to iterate. So let's take an example of a cushion brand. I wouldn't start a cushion brand just being a cushion brand. I would always start out by saying, you know, we want to make the home more little moments of joy within the home. for example,
Yeah.
right? And we'll start with 4 cushions with great slogans on. But if that ends up being, prints from independent artists, then that's fine too. You would write some guardrails around what that means. Or similarly, it might be, textures.
Yeah.
And textiles, sorry. And you kind of go in textiles. So I would always sort of allow yourself, don't hamstring yourself in really early on when you're in that iteration process. And by the way, it might be beyond launch. It might be in a year's 2, 3. Don't hamstring yourself, because not only is that difficult to get out of that mindset from a business point of view, but also I see people feel a bit of a failure if the cushions aren't working, for example, because people just don't like cushions, or the fabric's itchy, or whatever it might be. You need to give yourself that permission to develop the brand outside of a small arena. So I'd always do that. Practically, if you're doing something, consumer brand, the shows were good for us in the beginning. We don't go to them now because we're not looking to take on more stockists, but they're really great. There's some great ones in the UK, Birmingham, London. You get a little stand, you can be very creative on a budget. You see what other people are doing. You get to talk to other business owners. You understand things like, margins maybe a bit more. I was absolutely useless when it came to all that sort of back end stuff. They're really good to go to. A lot of people ask me about having a business partner. I had a business partner. One thing I see people do wrong all the time is they take on somebody just for moral support. I'd never take on a business with somebody who was too similar to you in terms of skills, because it's all right at the beginning, but it ends up causing fights.
Yeah.
Whereas, my business partner did finance and operations. So it was a very clean line between anything to do with the brand, the product, the sales I would do, and anything to do with, the warehouse, the financing, the operations he would do. So taking on a partner, not a bad idea. Could argue for and against, because obviously you're giving away 50% of your business up front when you can hire in those skills. But having said that, if you are going to do that, I would take on somebody with very different skills to you. So that would always be a piece of advice. And, the other thing, people stop when they say, oh, X happened and I realised I couldn't go on. And 99% of the time, the reason why they stop for me is just an average sort of Tuesday morning problem. So, it's like you've got to see those things as reasons to pivot, maybe reasons to stop doing something in part, but they're not reasons to stop. And that's why I go back to tip number 1, building in to your mindset and your business plan, that opportunity to evolve is hugely important, because when those problems strike, and let's go back to the cushion analogy, people just don't like cushions anymore, they've fallen out of favour. The business isn't over. You put those great prints onto tea towels or something. So you're building in that kind of mindset that can constantly go, no problem. Option B is this. And sometimes, sorry, so many tips, but sometimes, am I allowed to swear on this?
You swear away.
Okay, so sometimes I have this analogy that sometimes it's shit option A or shit option B. And everyone at work always laughs. But I think it's quite an important one, because sometimes there's not a great option.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean there's no option. It just means it's option A or shit option B. And I think, again, mindset thing. Yeah. And last on that, I'd say 80% done is always better. Perfectionism kills so many businesses. We've had, honestly, I would cringe if I looked at more than half of the stuff we've done, from products, campaigns, to people, to, so much stuff. But if I was, scrutinised and thought about that too much, I just wouldn't have moved forward.
No.
So I am quite sloth on a few things, but we get it done. And that's more important, definitely.
Yeah, completely. I think that's really good. And also, if you have that mindset of, even if shit option A or shit option B doesn't work, you'll learn from that for good option C, but you have to do something at that point. There might just be 2 possible roads to travel.
Absolutely. Giving up isn't an option. Changing is, refining is, pausing is, doing something different is, but saying, I'm just going to pin it all off.
Yeah.
It's not.
Well, that's been amazing. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I mean, if it's helpful, I mean, I'm really passionate about this subject, especially from a female point of view, actually. I sort of alluded to it before, but I think, you know, being able to do something for yourself quite often is great for women, and the juggle that we inevitably have to have that's real. And I think it allows you to sort of create your own boundaries. The 15 minutes of inspo thing on my Instagram, I started with the question, what does good look like? Because I think we sort of so often now say, oh, good looks like how big the turnover is. Whereas actually, I think we shouldn't fetishize that. We should say, actually, starting out in a business, it might be that good looks like me always taking Thursdays off, not starting till 11 in the morning, you know, making X amount of money, but always working in this kind of way. It's about setting a good business, to me, in 2023. Of course, finances is a metric for most people, but you should figure out what your own metrics are early on, because it seems obvious, but people don't. And then if you're just chasing the cash, and then 3 months down the line, you know, I've had friends who are florists, and, you know, I say, well, why aren't you doing the wedding with blue roses? And they'll say, well, because that looks awful. And I go, okay, then you should have defined early on that actually you were doing this partly for your own creative outlet and partly to make money. So defining what good looks like early on in terms of, yes, money being part of it, time being part of it, creativity being part of it. It's really important. And I would say that's something that's not spoken about at the inception of a business as much as I think it should be for you, nailing the business, but also nailing what we're doing this for in the first place, which is your own fulfillment and your own happiness.
And I guess it's kind of links to goal setting, doesn't it? Your goal doesn't have to be the same as my goal or your friend down the road's goal.
Totally.
And if you're not clear on that goal, how do you know when you are going towards it? How do you know when you've reached it? How do you know what you're aiming for?
Exactly. And then, you know, you have people sort of having a bit of a meltdown at year 2, going, well, it's not quite working with around the school hours. Or, you know, I didn't want it to be this big and this time demanding. And it's like, well, what did you set out to do? You know, maybe it's become more successful. Maybe it's less successful. Maybe you're not putting enough time in. So I think goals is important, but I think understanding that within goals, finance should only be one of them. Might be the main one. That's up to you, but it should only be one. There should be all the other boxes that you look at. That's what I definitely give advice.
No, I really like that. So there is a goal setting section, and I think I'm going to weave some of your quote in there because it is important. I think sometimes we do think, oh, the goal has to be to make X in this amount of time or get this many followers or these simple metrics, but actually that is just one part of the jigsaw puzzle. It really is, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely it is.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'll let you get to your meeting. Thank you so much. I massively appreciate your time. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
No worries. Take care.
Take care.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening to that episode of the podcast. I hope you really loved it. I love listening back to it too. Nicola is incredible. To find out more about NEOM Wellbeing, go to www.neom, that's NEOM, wellbeing.com. And if you have picked up a copy of the book, I'd love it if you would consider leaving a review. And if you haven't, you can find it in all good bookshops. See you soon.